Here we are, ready to talk about the second part of this lecture on culture. Of course, I hope you've already listened to and looked at part one. Now, we've already said how symbolic culture is. Remember, a symbol represents something else. Language is certainly the most important symbol, but any object that we have is a symbol of something in the culture. Now, the problems can come. What happens if the symbol does not mean the same thing to different people? This could be within subcultures, and it certainly can be between cultures. Just think of a symbol such as a fur coat, what that may mean to one as opposed to another, or a diamond ring. All kinds of things can be very different, both within the culture and subcultures and between cultures. So much in culture is arbitrary. Now, what do I mean by that? It's as though we just decided to do something. There's no reason why it couldn't have been something else. Why do we eat with a fork instead of with chopsticks? It's arbitrary. We could do either one, but our culture says fork. Okay? Now, as we move on and you think back to that most important symbol being language, it is the key to culture because it's the way that the culture is transmitted. Now, it's not the only way, but it is the primary, and especially between generations and across time. If there are a number of languages spoken within a culture, does that help a society? Well, not usually, unless everyone in that society speaks the same number of languages, and that number of languages includes the same languages. Everybody with me? Now, your book talks about the Sapir-Whorf thesis, and oh, I'm so sorry, I made a typo. That should be S-A-P-I-R thesis, okay? I'm sure you can figure that out. Now, the text just refers to it, but I want you to focus in on the way language does shape us. Think about the words that we use and the impact that they have. Now, I want to make this very specific. I want to bring this down to something that you use every day. Think about all the different words, all the different terms, all the different vocabulary that can pretty much mean the same thing, that can be pretty synonymous. Okay? When you think about how you feel when one term is applied to you instead of another. If I say the kids in my class, if I say the students in my class, if I say the learners in my class, if I say the men and women in my class, do you see the difference? That it actually transfers over to how you feel, and it certainly infers how I might feel. Think about the terms that you use when you try to clean up your language, as opposed to maybe everyday slang, or you know what I mean. The more we refine our language, the more the impact is, and it tends to be, in most cases, a positive one. Okay, I'm off my soapbox. Let's move on to the next one. Of course, in language and communication and symbols of culture, nonverbal communication is humongous. So much is conveyed in this way. And I have to admit, that's what I miss the most online. I can't see you. I can't see if you're getting the concept. I can't see if you're sound asleep. I can't see if you're the wheels are spinning and you're ready to add something to what I have to say. It's one of the reasons why I've gone to include a number of these lectures in my online courses. You may just want to read the written word, but hopefully by listening to some of this, you get a little bit of, you can almost imagine, I hope, the gestures that I'd be making in some of these sentences. And if not, well, let me know. Okay, back to gestures. As you, I'm sure, know, they're not the same in every culture. They're not the same in every subculture. There are just so many examples. It might be the okay sign. It might be thumbs up that vary between cultures. Think of sign language, and it could certainly be American Sign Language for the hearing impaired. It could be gang signs. It could be almost any kind of sign language and how they differ. I think one of my favorite ones was in realizing how gestures have different meanings in different cultures. I tend to, when I'm sitting down, on a bus or even in a chair, I will usually cross my legs, and you can often see the soles of my foot. That is an insult in some cultures, something that would certainly never cross my mind in our culture. But get my meaning? I think we're okay for this. And we'll certainly be dealing with more in later chapters. Now, I've mentioned this word a couple of times already, and you've already read your textbook, so hopefully this fits in. But let's go back a minute to sub and countercultures. Subcultures are the smaller groups within a culture. But usually those subcultures vary on only a couple of things. They have their own traits, but they still share in the larger culture. And share is the operative word here. They still agree with the basic core concepts of that culture. Subcultures can be based on so many things. And we all belong, especially in the United States, to tons and tons of subcultures. It could be geographic subculture. It could be ethnic group subculture. Think of your occupations. Many jobs have their own kind of subculture built in because there are specific traits that fit that subculture. Maybe it's the language, the terminology used, okay, the vocabulary. Think of someone who is a pilot as opposed to someone who's a computer programmer. Everybody get my drift? And certainly, sometimes it's the clothes we wear. Now, a counterculture is a little different. And to be a true counterculture, the group has to be, it's still living within that one culture, but it's against a basic primary aspect of the larger culture. It's a rejection of something important, okay, of some important major value of that larger culture. In the United States, we really have been, in my opinion, very lucky. There are few countercultures. The ones that we have either haven't lasted long or they haven't had much clout. They haven't been very large. They haven't had a lot of power. In other countries, there is a complete fight between two major countercultures within that society, within that culture. All I have to bring up probably is, pick almost any place in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, in many areas of Africa. It's a tough thing for a culture to survive if there are strong countercultures within it. Now here's a term, multiculturalism, and I certainly want you to pay particular attention to the way it is explained in your textbook. Until recently, the United States had downplayed the idea of multiculturalism. Of course, it has been Eurocentric. Okay, everybody with me? The focus has been on European culture as it came over to the United States. At least that's what it's called now. We are the most multicultural, we are the most heterogeneous nation of any high-income nation in the world. Until recently, the last couple of decades, the United States focused in on being a melting pot, where the different nationalities would all blend into a single American culture. I kind of like that phrase, e pluribus unum. I mean, just look at it in our history, where out of many, you have one. Now, today, we tend to be focusing more on multiculturalism instead of assimilation. Now, we're going to come to this again some more in future chapters. I do want to focus in on some of the criticisms of multiculturalism. And the reason for this, as you can kind of see down at the bottom here, is in my personal opinion, and this part is only my personal opinion, I think we've taken this a bit too far. Personally, I do agree with many of these criticisms that emphasizing multiculturalism encourages divisiveness, that it keeps us separate, that we have all these little parts instead of a whole. Again, that's my opinion. You can agree or disagree with it as long as you understand what multiculturalism means, and you can tell me, you can explain the criticisms of multiculturalism. And you could certainly look at these criticisms and say, no, they're wrong. This is why it has been a very good thing. Okay? Now we're back to this little part about theory and how the three major perspectives tend to explain culture. Now, I'll give you the little pictures here. You can figure that out. From the functional point of view, functionalists see culture as staying around because it meets the needs of people. Cultures perform the vital functions of a society, and a functionalist does tend to focus in on how culture unites a society, unites the people within that culture. It is certainly a macro level perspective. Remember that? All back from chapter 1, etc. So the major question of a functionalist when they're looking at culture is trying to see how the different aspects of culture fit together. Again, this doesn't mean that it's good. It doesn't mean that everything's rosy and wonderful. But a functionalist looks to see how it fits. The different types of functions, and I think your book did a good job on this, are the manifest and latent functions. Now, when you're looking at this, be sure that you can give me an example. We talked about this a little earlier in other lectures and in other chapters. But again, a functionalist person, a functionalist theorist looking at society is going to look for manifest functions, latent functions, and even the dysfunctions, and yes, that's spelled correctly, of the society. The conflict point of view sees culture as inequality. They are looking at a culture. When a conflict theorist studies a culture, they usually go directly to the economics, to the money, to the materialism, and tries to find out, how does this culture divide us? How does this culture focus in on inequality? Again, it's a macro level. Everybody with me? Remember to post questions. And the major question they're going to look at when they study a culture, any culture, is who benefits. The third one that isn't really, mentioned much in the chapter here is symbolic interactionist. And again, a theorist here focuses on the meanings that are attached to all of the actions and the symbols within a culture. It is aimed more at how the groups interact and is a micro level. Now, your book talked about the sociobiology approach, and you can certainly see that. I tend to, as you can probably guess, focus more in on the functional and the conflict approach here. So if that chart makes sense to you, then you're doing pretty well. In ending this little part, I do want to bring to your attention that a lot of folks say that geography determines culture. And I think there's a lot of examples here. If you think of the different geography around the world, you can almost see how that influences the cultures. When you think about the material culture of the clothes they wear, if you think about the values of how many people should be in a family, how extended the family could be, what is important to them? Is it water or is it oil? Okay? You can certainly see the difference here. When you think about different cultures around the world too, some cultures have more choice than others because of the values that are important to them, going back to part 1. But think how you are shaped simply by being born into one culture or another. If you have the opportunity, talk to someone from another country, especially someone who lived there for a good part of their life before coming to this country. If there's any students in our class this semester from another country, I really hope they will add some specific points at the discussion board about this. If you haven't traveled to other countries or you don't know many people from there, even talk to folks from other parts of our country. Now that may be a little bit more of subcultures, but it still brings up how different cultures are or subcultures are. It also says in your book and in other places that the number of cultures may be declining. I think the last count, maybe a decade or so ago, was around 7,000 different cultures, not just subcultures, but cultures. And that certainly is declining. The reasons given are usually technology and globalization. Are we moving to one megaculture? Or at least maybe a few megacultures. Is that good? Is that bad? My personal opinion, I think it's sad. When I look at Beijing or if I look at Paris, I don't want to see McDonald's. Okay? But on the other hand, I kind of like having the different choices from other cultures in our culture. So that's certainly a personal opinion. Everybody set with this? Again, this is a crucial chapter, and I want to be sure that you're familiar with it because it's going to stay crucial through the rest of the semester. Don't forget, pop me questions.